What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the TCL 4X 5G and the TCL 30XL. Now, before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the TCL 4X 5G, we're getting a 6.52-inch LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 320, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. With the TCL 30XL, we're getting a 6.82-inch LCD display that also has a 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, and an aspect ratio of 20.5:9. So in general, these displays are actually almost the same. The only real difference here is that with the TCL 30XL, first of all, at 6.82 inches versus 6.52 inches, this phone is clearly significantly larger, which is definitely a good thing if you're on your phone a lot. In addition to this, with an aspect ratio of 20.5:9 versus 20:9, the TCL 30XL has a slightly taller and more narrow form factor. So if you're doing something like watching a video in landscape mode, for example, you're going to get a more immersive experience. And if you're doing something like browsing the web, using social media, things like that, you'll be able to fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. So in general, despite both phones having pretty good displays for what they are, I would say because of the size and dimensions, the TCL 30XL is a little bit better here. For storage, both phones are getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so obviously no difference here, but I will say for what they are, 64GB is definitely decent. I mean, if you're more of a power user, if you have a lot of apps and stuff like that, you are probably going to want something with more storage. But in this price range, honestly, 64 is pretty much the best you're going to get. And for the average user, as long as you're more mindful of what you're putting on your phone and you're sure to use the microSD card whenever you can, 64GB will at least be acceptable. Now for security features, both phones do have face unlock and they both have fingerprint scanners right here on the back. But starting with the 4X 5G, let's go ahead and give them a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the TCL 30XL. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both fingerprint scanners were real fast and responsive. No issues at all. And again, remember, both phones do have face unlock, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, with the TCL 4X 5G, we got a 13 megapixel main camera. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 16 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. So in case you're wondering, despite this phone not having a depth sensing camera, portrait mode somehow works perfectly fine on this phone. Now with the TCL 30XL, we got that same 13 megapixel selfie camera. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, as far as features go, these phones have pretty much everything, including an ultra wide camera and a macro camera. So if you're taking a lot of photos and you want a wider variety of features, you're really not going to go wrong with either of them. And when it comes to quality, I don't think there's really a huge difference. The TCL 30XL might be a little bit better, but honestly, depending on the angles and the actual pictures you're taking, the TCL 4X 5G is really going to be just as good. And keep in mind, these are both really entry-level phones. So with either phone, the photo quality is not going to be nearly as good as an upper end mid-range phone, let alone a $1,400 flagship phone. So if you're really into mobile photography and you're just constantly taking photos all the time, then you might be able to justify spending a little bit more to get a higher end device with a better camera. But for the more casual camera users out there, if you're really just taking a couple nice photos here and there for social media and you want the pictures to look good, but you don't need the absolute top of the line quality, either phone will be perfectly fine. Now as far as RAM and processor go, this is where there's really a huge difference. On one hand, with the TCL 4X 5G, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 480 5G processor. With the TCL 30XL, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio A25. So when it comes to performance, there's really no question the TCL 4X 5G is quite a bit faster than the TCL 30XL. In fact, in that regard, despite the phones being really similar and actually almost the same in a lot of different ways, when it comes to performance, there's really no contest here. The 4X 5G is just so much faster. On one hand, with the TCL 30XL, you're really only going to be able to do basic activities on this phone, like occasional web browsing, social media, streaming content like videos and music, and really not a whole lot else. But with the TCL 4X 5G, while on one hand, this phone is still not going to be anywhere near as fast as a flagship phone, it's definitely quite a bit faster. So if you're really going to be on your phone a lot, then you will get a better experience with the TCL 4X 5G. In addition to this, the TCL 4X 5G does have 5G connectivity, whereas the TCL 30XL doesn't. So in general, I would say if you're more of a heavy user, or even just a moderate user and performance is really important to you, the TCL 4X 5G will definitely be a much better choice. But if you're really just doing doing basic things like web browsing and social media and watching the occasional video here and there, the TCL 30XL will still be perfectly fine. Now to give you an idea of what this looks like, I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on both phones, and here are the scores I got. So again, as you can see, the TCL 4X 5G scored almost double the score of the TCL 30XL. So again, in general, if you want the faster phone between the two, the TCL 4X 5G is definitely the clear winner. But on the other hand, for really basic activities, if you're really not doing a whole lot on your phone, the TCL 30XL should at least get the job done. For the battery, with the TCL 4X 5G, we're getting a 4500 mAh battery that I believe supports 10 watt fast charging, and with the TCL 30XL, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 18 watt fast charging. So in general, while the difference definitely is not huge by any means, the TCL 30XL does have an advantage here because the battery is a little bit larger. So if battery life is really important to you, then definitely keep this in mind. And for the charging speeds, again, I don't really know the exact figure for the TCL 4X 5G, but in my experience, the charging speed is actually pretty good, and same goes for the TCL 30XL. So in that regard, there's not really a significant difference between the two. But again, if you do want the larger battery, the TCL 30XL will have an advantage there. Another thing to keep in mind here is the software. While I'm not really expecting any major updates for either phone, the TCL 30XL does have Android 12, whereas for whatever reason, the TCL 4X 5G has Android 11. So if you want a slightly newer version of Android, the TCL 30XL will have an advantage. In addition to this, keep in mind, neither phone has NFC, so if you do really want a phone that can use tap and pay, then you are going to want to get something else. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, it's actually kind of split here because on one hand, when it comes to performance, the TCL 4X 5G is better and by a lot too. If you want a phone that's decently fast and you're really going to be on your phone consistently, I do think you're going to get a much better experience with the TCL 4X 5G. First of all, it has 5G connectivity. Second of all, as you saw from the Geekbench 5 test, this phone is just so much faster. In fact, it's even faster than some phones that are double or triple its price. But on the other hand, with the TCL 30XL, weirdly enough, I feel like this phone is better in pretty much every other way. The display is larger and it has better dimensions. So if you're consuming a lot of content, especially watching videos, things are going to look better on the TCL 30XL. The camera is also arguably a little bit better. The TCL 30XL also has a larger battery and a newer version of Android. So overall, it really comes down to if you want better performance. In that case, definitely go with the TCL 4X 5G. But if you don't really care about performance, which I don't know how many people out there really don't care about performance, but maybe you're just watching videos every now and then and not really doing a whole lot else on your phone, in that case, I would say the TCL 30XL will be a better choice. But honestly, for most people, although the TCL 30XL does have more advantages, I feel like the performance advantage you get with the TCL 4X 5G really just outweighs all of this. But this concludes my comparison between the TCL 4X 5G and the TCL 30XL. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.